Okay, so as you know, we are a public charter school. We follow all state guidelines regarding your students. We strive to offer the same level of care and academic support that you would find in your local ISD. If you have any questions that aren't answered in this call today, please feel free to reach out to me or my team. We will be taking questions in the chat, and I will answer the ones that I can. If I don't feel comfortable answering on the chat, then I will send them to Mr. Dunnick and we'll answer them in our Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So I'll hand it over to Mr. Dunnick now.
Thank you, Mrs. Garthune. I'm very excited to interact with you all on a more individual basis today. So this will be catered much more specifically to second grade and third grade scholars. If you've heard me talk before in an info night or Facebook Live, those have been very philosophical, very general, but I want today to be very specific to what your kids are going to learn, kind of the curriculum that we've been developing and what we're inculcating them in over this next year, kind of tell you about the process, and then answer any of your questions. So just like what Mrs. Garthune said, if you want to note those questions down or write them in the chat, when we get to the end of providing you with all of this rich information, I want to get very specific into your questions. So what I'm going to do is kind of talk about the curricular overview with a lot more specificity today. So what does our phonics program look like? What does our language arts holistic development look like? Math, science, history, specials, even some extracurriculars. And then kind of go over a general schedule of a second and third graders day. What does a day in the life for one of these young scholars look like? So I've actually put together a little bit of a presentation so that you can interact in a little bit different way and not just me talking at you. And it kind of gives you a visual representation as we move through kind of whatever our curriculum looks like. So similar to what we've talked about previously about the classical education stages, and the majority of our students in this stage, especially your young scholars, are in this grammar stage where it's an acquisition of a lot of content and skills by which we are drawing them into this rich heritage of Western culture and providing them with the necessary skills to be able to be independent thinkers, holistic learners, long-term developmental individuals who can take all of these very specific skills, content, and habits that we're inculcating them in and be successful and autonomous individuals outside of that. So I want to talk about one of our unique language arts curricula. So Spalding is our phonics program, and that is often different for some of our parents that are new to coming into Great Hearts, that we don't do whole language learning, we don't do basal readers, we go back to the fundamentals of the English language, all the way back to individual phonograms and phonemes and encoding and decoding. And you might have some trepidation right now that maybe your students are coming from a program that didn't, have this strong emphasis on phonemic awareness. Don't worry, all of our students, kindergarten through sixth grade, will be going through this phonics program from the very beginning. Now, of course, the kindergartners will have a much longer process of initial skill acquisition. Now, second graders and third graders, it's about a medium size. So we want to go back to the basics of reading and writing, those initial phonograms, cultivating them in that rich language and providing them the skills that they can then access the English language with much more efficiency and effectiveness. So a little bit more information about this. The students start with just individual phonemic awareness. So they learn the sounds of the phonemes, and then they go to multi-letter phonograms. And then they quickly start to encode and decode. So putting the sounds together to make words. Even though students read or might be fluent readers and have automaticity, this going back to the beginning of phonemic awareness is extraordinarily powerful. Now, we had some questions about cursive writing. Now, of course, all of our students, for the majority, unless they're transferring from one of our other campuses, have more than likely never done this program. So we provide a lot of support on this first year of bringing students up to what we know that they're capable of. So at the end of second grade, they start learning cursive. So don't worry about those second graders. We're going to steep them in manuscript writing and all of this formative information before even going to the cursive process. Now, at a mature campus in Great Hearts, third graders would start with cursive. Now, we know These third graders probably haven't done cursive before. So we're going to do something very similar to our second graders, where there's a lot of onboarding within that process, going back to the beginning, even before jumping to what's developmentally appropriate for a third grader. And then we would get them all through that cursive writing process. So there's no initial expectation that a student needs to come in having phonemic awareness and being able to write in cursive. We start from the beginning and support them through that process. So that is one major aspect of what the second and the third graders do. And they'll come home talking about Spalding, and they'll have, the second graders will have a pink notebook, the third graders will have a blue notebook, but more or less they're doing very, very similar things. They're practicing their phonograms at school. They're learning how to write their letters either in manuscript or cursive very beautifully. They're learning how to articulate the rules and the markings that allow us to acquire information from individual words and then be able to spell them. And then we go from there and kind of cycle them through that process. So we don't like to call it a spelling program. They do have spelling quizzes and spelling tests, but it's not memorization. It's not sight words. It's providing them a lot of rich information while they're active participants in that process to practice the thing that we want them to do independently. And this might be new to you. So this book that I put up on the visual, The Writing Road to Reading, that is like our core text that walks all the kindergarten through sixth graders through that process. Now, of course, teachers have a teacher's guide that they use, but this, if you were interested in seeing it for yourself, this is one of our core curricular texts for our phonics program that we use as reference. And of course, Mrs. Garthune, she's ready with some resources, some online resources that we have developed internally that can help parents who are new into this. Because second and third graders, they're kind of injected right into the middle of that process, and that onboarding that we provide, especially with new students in this initial year, it's helpful to communicate with parents about that as well, because this might be new to you. Maybe not did you learn phonics through your educational experience. So if you have specific questions about that, make sure to note them down. So staying within our language arts theme, I want to cover all of those aspects before going to a different content area. We have our literature studies. And on the left side of the screen, those are our second grade classics to keep. And on the right side of the screen are our third grade classics to keep. Now, the way that I like to articulate how we use literature within the classroom to support students in their moral formation and their acquisition of beautiful language and their discussion of these greater philosophical concepts, that is much more effective in those use of conversation and as a literature study for the class. We do not assume that these texts are developmentally appropriate with respect to reading automaticity for students. So in knowing a second grader and saying, hey, you're now ready to just read Charlotte's Web independently. Maybe, maybe not. So our course of action in doing these literature studies are much more teacher driven, much more group driven, where it's more of a literature study that the students are reading and discussing together, not necessarily for reading practice. So that is a large component of our literature time, where we are steeping them in rich, beautiful texts that have stood the test of time, that have transcended the authors and kind of speak to us as individuals, as human beings in this reality, while also noting that these second and third graders, they're still learning how to read. A lot of them need to continue through that phonics process, which is really supported with Spalding. But of course, they need time to practice books that are on their developmental level. So in second grade, we call them reading groups. So dependent on the student's schedule, they might do every other day. They might do literature one day and they might do reading groups on another day. Some grade levels say, we're going to do both on the same day. We'll do a little bit of literature and a little bit of reading groups. Now, in those reading groups, students are grouped homogenously based on their acquisition of reading automaticity and provided with maybe little short readers or passages on their reading level that they can practice consistently at their developmental level. So they're practicing something that is very specific for what their needs are, while still also having the opportunity to to be brought beyond their own ideas to these great books. So we do those things hand in hand. Now, third grade looks very similar, but it's more developmentally appropriate. So third graders, it's not best to give them little short passages or readings that are just, you know, one-off. We read one time during our reading groups. So in third grade, we call them book clubs. In third grade, they do a very similar back and forth, some literature some days and then book clubs in other days. And it's the same thing where the students are grouped homogeneously, but they're given a longer text, another great book, but more on their reading level. So maybe this group together is doing a book club on Indian in the Cupboard, or another book, dependent on their group and their reading needs. So that way they're still practicing at their developmental level. They're still practicing their reading fluency, but that goes hand in hand with our literature. So again, if you have specific questions on what that looks like or why we do that, definitely note those down and I can address them at the end. So again, continuing within language arts, there are a lot of components. We've got grammar, writing, literature, phonics. On the left side of the screen, I did second grade. And on the right side of the screen, I did third grade again. And that transition from second grade to third grade, as we cycle through content and information in our curriculum, is very cyclical to meet their foundational needs and kind of build upon those things, those habits that we're forming in the classroom. Grammar and writing kind of take a more effective approach in that transition between second grade and third grade. So in second grade, we do a wonderful homeschool program, a classical education program for both writing and grammar. The writing component is called Writing with Ease, and the grammar component is called First Language Lessons. And both of these are extraordinarily foundational in building students' habits of intellectual order to be able to develop them into effective writers and communicators. So specifically in our writing program, we don't do any free writing. We don't do any journal writing. We don't do any creative writing. We fundamentally believe that putting those opportunities in front of our students will only build bad habits. You know that young children, if we just let them loose and say, why don't you write a journal prompt or creatively write about this situation? They're going to use inventive spelling. They're probably not going to use the correct capital letters, the correct punctuation. And if we do that consistently, it's just forming bad habits with that respect. And we do that in a lot of our content areas, but it's very significant in our writing program. So we do copy work and narration and dictation, steeping students in beautiful writing and helping them to form those habits so that when they get to the point where they're ready to independently write, they've gone through a long process of, oh, I know what that should look like. I know that sentences start with capital letters, proper nouns have capital letters. I have to have punctuation mark. Our Spalding Phonics helps them learn how to spell appropriately. Grammar is very similar, where we are providing them the foundation of sentences and words and parts and identifying in passages and sentences why an author might use a particular part of speech to communicate information about reality. Because that's really all that it is. You know, it's squiggles on a piece of paper that have been given meaning to communicate about reality. And if we can show them why these things are doing the things that they're doing, then they are kind of being steeped in the richness of beautiful language. Now, as they make the transition from second grade to third grade, there's a separation of curricula. So kindergarten, first grade, second grade does Writing with Ease, First Language Lessons. As they transition into third grade, which is kind of a pivotal transition as they're starting to mature, they're still underdeveloped, but they're starting to mature. We have a program that is extraordinary called the IEW, the Institute for Excellence in Writing. And it really takes this idea of what we've brought them through with the beautiful language and those habits and those formative skills to start to dissect and insect input their own ideas into their writing. So we can provide more resources on that, but it's a very structured and scaffolded program starting in the third grade that students have their own binders and own resources that they put their writing in. They're doing keyword outlines. They're walking through these passages to help them continue to prepare for what effective, beautiful writing should look like. And similar, that grammar portion is just a little bit more developmentally appropriate as they're making that transition of being steeped in those habits to now what should it look like when I am accessing information, when I'm looking at writing and beautiful writing, and I'm starting to think about how I can do that effectively. So that's a little transition between our grammar and writing between the 2nd grade and the 3rd grade. Let's go this way. So if you've heard me speak about Singapore mathematics before, I'm going to reiterate it a little bit with respect to kind of the content that 2nd graders and 3rd graders learn. So the CPA approach, the concrete to pictorial to abstract, that approach where students have to develop this idea of numeracy and reality in the world of how these things, these representative structures on paper, the things that we're talking about, are based in reality. So even the 2nd graders and 3rd graders, even the 4th and 5th graders are going to work with concrete things, are going to have manipulatives in their hands to start thinking about place value and fractions and graphing and shapes and volume, and thinking about how can I represent these things that we're discussing in the real world. Because unless we give them that foundation and we just skip to the algorithmic representation, there's this disconnect of the thing that I'm doing that is something real, and how do I make the connection in that reality? So spending a lot of time on that concrete piece, even before going to the pictorial piece, we're then saying, okay, I'm ready. I don't have to hold something physical in my hand. I can now hold that in my mind. I have a picture of that thing, or I can draw something, or I can transcribe it or talk about it and still have a visual representation. And then and only then do the students go to the algorithm, which is the most beautiful, effective way to do mathematical computation. But if we skip to that process, skip over the process of identifying how these things work in reality, and we just skip to, well, you have to memorize a certain series of steps, and then you can't extrapolate that to other situations, then we're missing this core understanding of early numeracy. So that process going through that. And the Singapore mathematics program is very cyclical. So starting from kindergarten, there's this content that go throughout each grade level that just extend and go beyond for each grade level. So with respect to numbers and place value and fractions, and even 2nd graders starting to get into the concept of multiplication and division, doing concrete models of sets and groups, putting things together and taking them apart. 3rd graders building upon that to say, I've seen those sets and groups. Now I can hold that information in my head and I can start to use that process into double-digit multiplication and division, because I have that concept of sets and groups. And now I'm going to learn how that thing is done really well. And doing charts and graphs and area and volume, and kind of touching on these very basic structures at the appropriate developmental level, so that when they get to 4th and 5th grade and they're doing much more computation with the things that they've already seen in those previous grades. Now, of course, I love to talk about how this approach is, again, very different. I can't assume that any student coming in the middle of their educational experience will have had background or foundational information like this. So we do a lot of support in the classroom, similar to our phonics, where we want to overload our students in thinking differently and deeply about what we're putting in front of them, and not assuming that they already have this information. So we're walking students through that process and supporting them, and talking to them in small groups and working with individual sets of students and doing tutoring to support students in acquiring this new form of thought, but also understanding for the most part, all of the students who will be coming in to Great Hearts Arlington are new to this process. So our teachers knowing that, and our students knowing that, and our parents knowing that, and saying like, okay, so what should that look like? We're not going to just jump right into, here's what we think you should know because you've gone through kindergarten, 1st grade, and 2nd grade at Great Hearts already. We have to transition them through that process, and knowing what is appropriate for that, and kind of what the end goal is in mind, and having that understanding of we're going to be very careful and intentional about supporting students through that. So for our science and our history, we use the core knowledge sequence. And this is it's a fabulous program created by E.D. Hirsch, which establishes a baseline of information within Western society. What should an American in today's society know? So it even extends to poetry and literature about these base level things that are kind of moving out of progressive education. Maybe facts or historical figures or even nursery rhymes or phrases and sayings that unless we intentionally inject them into the lives of our students and thinking about where have we come from so that we can better make decisions about where we're going. The core knowledge sequence has this body of knowledge that we hope to present to our students that is a lot of that. So our history is a lot about history. It's about stories from history. And we study histories from around the world. It's not just Western society. We study cultures from all ancient societies and around the globe, similar to the different theologies and traditions and religions and social structures from around the world. There is a slight prioritization of Western society because of who we are as Americans, how we have come to our democracy in America from ancient Greece and ancient Rome, coming to who we are as Americans. But it does not neglect world cultures and world geography as well. So there's a lot for the students to draw them outside of themselves. And we do that in all of our content areas, but maybe history is one of those ideas where we try to help students see beyond themselves. Rather than putting a mirror in front of their own face, we want them to see other ideas, other social structures, other historical figures, so that they can start to get a representation of, yes, they are an important piece of their world, but they're not the only piece. Kind of trying to open their eyes and to develop a sense of wonder and a depth of inquiry to see, to transition them from just looking inwardly to seeing themselves as an integral part of something much greater. Now, the science we supplement as well, because we have this body of knowledge with respect to science as well. And it's wonderful, and we draw students through a lot of content areas in both second grade and third grade, but we want students to directly observe and interact with the things that we're putting in front of them. So within science, we have to make that real. So similar to what we would do with mathematics with the manipulatives, we also have, we supplement our core knowledge sequence with FOSS. So FOSS is a separate curriculum, but we use that to bolster the investigative part of science. So FOSS provides a lot of hands-on experimentation that students can do with each other and with the teachers in class, so they can see science concepts and the investigative process in real life. So maybe where core knowledge has an abundance of information that is pivotal to who we are within Western society about, the scientific process, FOSS allows it to come to life in our classes. So where our curriculum would be core knowledge, FOSS allows us to do it in a more investigative basis, allows us student to have direct observation of the things that they're discussing in the classroom. And then, of course, we have our specials. Our specials are what we call the extracurricular areas. Let me rephrase that. They're not extracurricular. They are extraordinarily important to our curricula, but they have their own teachers for these areas. So for PE, for music, for art, and for Spanish, the second graders and third graders will have two 40-minute specials every other day. And you'll see that on their schedule as well, where maybe on Monday they'll have PE and they'll have music, and then on Tuesday they'll have art and Spanish. So I'm going to speak very briefly about each of these individually, because you might be thinking, how do we do this, the structure that is important for students, how do we do it in a classical model? So PE is one of those really significant areas where we would say, yes, fine and gross motor skills are really important to learn, but it is underneath the umbrella of learning who we are as human beings, and that physical process is very important. It's not just the intellect and the social part, it's that the physical body as well, and how do we move well and interact well to have that piece of who we are as human beings be supported in a really intentional and effective way. So yes, we do sports and we learn how to do individual skills like throwing and catching and dribbling, but it's all within this idea of how do we create in ourselves this idea of our physicality as being representative of more than what we currently are. So we don't like, PE is not just an extension of recess, or it's not just go and play games. There are a multitude of facets about creating intentionality within the conversation of our students about our body is important, and how do we take care of it, and how do we use it well, and how do we, yes, of course, develop teamwork and responsibility, and how to win and lose well, and competition. All of those things are inserted into that curriculum. And then art, very similarly, where we are drawing students outside of themselves. We are putting in front of them the beautiful works of classical media, sculpture, and paint, things that are representative of reality, where we can look at a picture and say, I can interact with that because there's something that transcends the artist or the sculpture that represents reality in a way that I can interact with it. So that's the major juxtaposition between a classical form of art or maybe a modern form of art, where a modern form of art, I might not know what it's representing. I might have to ask the artist or the sculptor. I might have to read the little blurb at the museum. It doesn't transcend the person that created that. But we're trying to, again, open our students' eyes to who they are in reality, and to help them see more of the beautiful things and inculcate them in those things and develop an aesthetic sensibility. And of course, along with that is habit formation and skills, line, form, texture, value, having students practice those art skills as a representative of the great works that we're putting in front of them. So again, I'll reiterate with music, it's very similar. We put in classical music and draw them into developing a taste for the more beautiful thing. Students have a pretty good understanding between what's good and what's bad. They don't have a good understanding between what's good and what's better. And we're always trying to put the better things, the more morally forming things, the formative curricula, the formative conversations, because everything that we put in front of our students is morally forming. It's either going to draw them toward virtue or it's going to lead them toward vice. So if we can continually think intentionally about the right things that we're putting in front of them. But again, in music, the second graders and third graders being drawn through rhythm and initial music theory with half notes and quarter notes and whole notes, and how did those true forms of things help to come together to represent something that is more beautiful than its individual parts. And then Spanish. Spanish is fully immersive, which again, you might have some trepidation either on one extreme or the other, where you'd say, my student hasn't learned any Spanish, or you might be coming from a Spanish speaking community. And we would say this very rich cultural program that we provide to our students allows both of those students to be successful. Yes, there's initial skill acquisition of vocabulary and dialogue, and then being immersed in doing the active participation in learning that thing, but also the student camaraderie there, that they can interact with other people who also have skills beyond them, that they can work together to see a different person's perspective. This curricula that we use involves history and cultural discussions from around the world, from Spanish-speaking communities, to continue to draw our students outside themselves, which is supportive of multiple experiences when students are coming in. So allowing students to come together within that process, we found students to be very successful on both ends of the spectrum. So I'm going to go through this is a second grade schedule. Now, the only difference within the scheduling of the second and third grade is that the third grade has a little bit more instructional minutes with respect to language arts, literature, which necessitates only one recess. And we think at that transition, both developmentally appropriately with the content that we're transitioning them through, also providing them with opportunities like PE and transition times and recess. This is the transition to only one recess time. So the second graders will have 2 recess times. The third graders will only have 1. So I just kind of want to walk you through a second grade schedule. Now, of course, third graders will be very, very similar. The lengths of time might be a little bit longer with respect to math and language arts, and then only one recess. So students can start getting dropped off at 7:15 a.m. And during that process, that half-hour period that they're coming in, they're being welcomed by all of our teachers and our wonderful faculty, and they go straight to the classroom. And teachers often welcome them into the classroom as well, and then give them a little task. So they need to organize their things. Maybe they need to choose if they're having hot lunch or not. They need to maybe start on a little bell work activity so that they can start to transition into from home life to our school life. And again, and I've said this before, that's why we wear uniforms as well. That's why we kind of elevate our aesthetic with respect to our clothing, to say these are our work clothes, maybe similar to a doctor or a construction worker. I'm putting this thing on and I'm ready to do my work. So that transition from the car to the classroom, it's very intentional too, to say it's very consistent. The expectations are very structured to say I'm now transitioning into a community of learners. And of course, even in second grade and third grade, it's appropriate to what does that conversation look like for young people, for 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and having that understanding as well. It's not just militant and structured and rigid. It is very structured and intentional, but very loving and warm and inviting to the students. So also that transition to 7:45, the bell rings, we're ready to start our day. The students pledge to the American flag and the Texas flag, attendance is taken. Maybe they take the lunch count there as well. Maybe address any scheduling things that might be different. They say, hey, today we have Spanish and we have music, because it might be a red day. We color coordinate our days so that students know what specials they're going to on any particular day. Address any outlying issues, and then jump right into some wonderful content. And the majority of our teachers within their instructional periods start with Spalding because it allows students to come together as a whole group and do something very structured and intentional. And they're ready, they're energetic, they're ready, it's lively, their minds are fresh, and we can ask them to do good work at that time. So this grade level, following their Spalding block, their phonics block, on a red day, they would go to Spanish. The Spanish teacher comes to the classroom. So the Spanish teacher would come into the classroom. It's good because the students use their desks and writing utensils within that space, and it's a good consistent space for them, where they'd have 40 minutes of Spanish. Now on an art day, on a blue day, they would go to the art room. The art room doesn't have carpet on the floor. They sit at big tables on stools. They've got easels and all of their art supplies there. So that's a much better space for them to learn. And for the second graders, at that point, they go to recess, where all of their sections would go to recess at the same time. So within this first year, we'll have 3 teachers and 3 apprentices for second and third grade. So all 3 of the sections, all 6 of the teachers would go out with the students, and they would play, and they would be in community, and they would interact, and they would have some decompressive time after some academics. We try to make it as safe as possible, but as unstructured as possible, because we're doing a lot of structure and intentionality throughout the school day, and we want them to have some space to just be with their friends and chat and decompress. So coming back from that, there's a short period for these second graders that they have snack and read aloud. Now, students bring their own snacks to school, and what we suggest is a water bottle, and a healthy snack that's not messy. Now, of course, we can't mandate what you're going to be sending, but we highly encourage no Gatorade, no soda pop. That can be a mess, that can cause issues, and something that is, in a container, or that's not messy, that students can grab from their backpack or from their lunch bin to have during that time. And then they transition into their math block. So we have kind of a twofold curricula in the second and third grade that allows for consistent practice of mathematical facts as well, that I didn't really touch on before, but that is inserted later on into our curriculum after they've gone through that CPA approach, where they understand how addition and subtraction works conceptually. multiplication and division work conceptually, and then they say, great, we have that understanding. Now it would be good to practice that consistently. Same that we would do with our phonograms every day, practicing their phonogram. Same with poetry recitation, where we practice the thing, the memorization piece, because it's good. So they go through that process, and then they have some poetry time, where I just spoke about, where we're giving them great works of poetry, and we're reading them, and we're not assessing them, but maybe taking them apart, trying to understand how words are interconnected or how they convey meaning. But also there's a piece of poetry recitation. So your scholars might be asked to, over a given period of time, memorize a piece of poetry and then recite it in front of the class. We love students to go through this process from the very beginning, so that they've been an active participant in their learning process, and they are being drawn toward the ability to speak to their peers in organized ways, where in our class conversations, students start to feel more encouraged and active and confident to share their ideas and opinions. So that when they get to middle school and high school, and they've gone through, I've spoken in front of my class in discussions and dialogues, I've done poetry recitations in front of my classmates, that they are ready and confident to go beyond those things, to maybe do presentations, but that'll come later. And then they, like I spoke about before, following poetry, given the particular day, they'd either do their literature study. So in second grade, they might be working through Charlotte's Web. In third grade, they might be working through Pinocchio or Trumpet of the Swan. And then on the other day, they would be doing their reading groups or their book clubs, where they're in groups of students working on very similar reading, automaticity, and fluency practice. Then they'll have lunch. They'll go to the multi-purpose room we have. They do PE and lunch in there, where they can have their lunch. So we did have some questions about lunch in the lunch program. So we partner with Preferred Meals, and they bring in the food each day. This allows us to provide students with a school lunch without staffing our own lunch workers, our own cafeteria, or cooking our own food. So we will provide you with a month-to-month menu, so you can plan ahead. And students have a little ID where they can punch in their number, or we scan their little card, and that the money that you put onto their account, which is done online, it just gets pulled from their account when they're going to eat the school lunch. If you want specifics on prices or how that's set up, Mrs. Garthune can definitely be in touch about that process. But just knowing that a student is not required to bring their own lunch. We do accommodate for severe food allergies or necessities with maybe snacks or lunchtime when students are bringing their own food. But knowing the menu ahead of time for Preferred Meals allows, even in those accommodated situations, you to kind of pick and choose the foods that you want. So going from there, it looks like for this second grade class, they have a little bit of time for them to write in their planner, in their agenda. So the students, both second grade and third grade, will have a little planner or agenda that they can buy from the school, and it allows them to stay organized with respect to their homework, their assignments, the things that they're learning, any communication that needs to go to or from school. We use that agenda, that planner, to communicate between home and school. And they have a take-home folder as well, where we show you the work that they've been doing. Continuing from there, on a given day, they might have music, they might go to the music room, or they might go to the PE class or outside. Then the second graders come back for another little recess time. The third graders will only have one recess per day. And then on this second grade class, what we've given our teachers the option of is either to do grammar and writing every day a little bit, or to do grammar and writing on separate days a lot. So this second grade class has decided they're going to do grammar and writing every other day to kind of have more significant instructional time on each of those individual pieces. But some of our classes say we're going to do grammar and writing together every day. So knowing that dependent on the instructional minutes by the grade level, students are getting those grammar and writing concepts consistently. Similarly, we do that with history and science, because there are fewer instructional minutes and less content for each grade level. Teachers can either do history and science every day, or they can break it up between a history day or a science day. I've seen some grade levels even say, we're going to do a full unit on history for this full quarter and get through a lot, and then switch to a full unit on science. So they're doing it every day. So having an understanding of, yes, they're getting history and science instruction, but it might be every other day, or it might be truncated for each day or unit by unit. Now, each day, every grade level, every class has this Lyceum period, which is like a flex time. So students in class would be working on extension activities, and students who might need some sort of additional support in school, this is the time where students are doing other things. They might get pulled for ESL, they might go to OT, they might go to speech, they might have reading groups, they might have some SPED intervention. This allows very intentional time during the day that students who need to get specific accommodations aren't missing out on core instruction. So they're not missing out on math, or they're not missing out on music with their classmates, but this is the time that everyone might be doing something different. And it also decreases the stigma behind a particular student doing something else. If we're all doing something else during Lyceum, everyone's kind of doing different groups or going to different places throughout the school, then that reduces the time that students, like, I always get pulled out during Spanish time. Well, that core instruction is really important and intentional. So we have this flex time, this Lyceum, where students can receive additional support. And following that, teachers help the students to get packed up. They'll get organized, they'll get ready, they'll sit in their seats. Maybe they'll read a book quietly as parents are coming through the line. And as parents arrive, we dismiss students from their classes and kind of walk them to the car line and get them in the car. Now, at this point, students who are signed up for Athenaeum would go to Athenaeum. So an Athenaeum teacher would come to the classroom and relieve those students from their classroom and go to the Athenaeum class. And what I've said before is that Athenaeum is not babysitting. It's not just after care. It is an enrichment program where they get to do activities and extension of the curriculum. We bring people in to kind of make that time much more intentionally enriching and academic, and not just hangout time or not just homework time. Now, if students need homework help, we support them with their homework. I think it's also important to note that we do provide free tutoring. And this is really important for thinking about opening new campuses and having this wide spectrum of academic abilities for our students, and understanding that some students are going to need some support. Some students are stronger in some areas than in others, and we need to provide that to our students either in small group during the day, or even allow that to happen a couple times a week after school. So there will be times after school has gotten started where we are just objectively checking on how are our students doing, coming into the culture of Great Hearts, and how are they making progress in their academics. And if parents or teachers agree that we need some additional intervention, then we'll start tutoring at that point. So having that as an option is really important internally to provide those academic needs to our parents. We also had some questions about homework and extracurricular. So I think this is kind of a good point. While students are getting dismissed, what might those options be? So within the extracurricular portion, what we do is we lean on our faculty and staff to create extracurricular opportunities for our students that they're really passionate about doing. We've had a lot of different options. We've had Run Club, we've had Chess Club, we've had Passport Club, learning about different countries around the world. We've had a Greek mythology club. So what we are going to do this coming year is, once we get started into that first quarter, once students are coming into the culture of Great Hearts and getting acclimated, and we then start to think about, okay, we want to provide some additional extracurricular activities to our students to kind of round out or provide more community engagement for things outside of the classroom. Then we'll start working internally about what should those things be, and then communicating to our community, our parents, about those opportunities. So more information to come on that. Now, for homework, the second graders average 30-40 minutes of homework, and third graders a little bit more, maybe 40-45 minutes of homework. Now, this usually entails a little bit of Spalding. So they'll go home and they'll practice those words that they practiced at home. We ask our parents to dictate the words to their students, so it's not just copying down the spelling words, but saying the words to their students and them saying the sounds and writing them out. They'll probably have a little bit of math homework, maybe a page out of their workbook that's an extension of what they've been learning in the classroom. They might have a little bit of poetry recitation practice. And then of course they might be asked to read a little bit of their literature story with you or to you or from you, dependent on their ability. So that process is both for continuing the practice of the things that we've been doing in class, but also helping students to gain the responsibility of taking this thing we've asked them to do and extending it to them with much more responsibility on the student's part, where we'd say creating this space where a student is responsible for their own learning at school and taking it home, practicing it and communicating it, and doing something a little bit difficult because that's good for them. And then that kind of scaffolds them toward what the expectations will be in middle school and high school. And if we've started that at a very low level, even in kindergarten, they have a little bit of homework, showing them with consistency what that expectation is, we found that to be very successful. Now, in the off chance that the goal of what homework is not coming through with what we're asking them, because the goal of homework should be a continuation of what's happening in the class, and a little bit of responsibility for a student to do that. If it's becoming extraordinarily frustrating, if it's taking them an hour and a half, we would say the homework is not doing what it was supposed to do. So that's a really important communication aspect that we ask to do between the student and the parent, where we'd say, if that goal is not being met, then it's not worth doing. If a student is becoming more frustrated or not enjoying the process of that thing doing what it's supposed to be doing, then we need to communicate that with you directly and make adjustments as necessary. But that is very generally what our homework minutes for those grade levels is, and kind of what that might look like day to day. And students will have a take-home folder where they put their stuff in, and we'll help that to be organized with their agenda and their planner to communicate from school and home consistently. So I think that's enough specificity from me, from my presentation. I want to just open it up now to questions. So as you've been taking notes, as Mrs. Garthun has been watching the chat, I would love to make this a little bit more interactive. I'd love her to maybe call on you with respect to the question that you had, and you can share it with the group.
If Ms. Chatila is back on the call, Ms. Chatila had a question regarding how is bullying addressed at Great Hearts. Ms. Chatila, if you want to ask that question. I'm not sure if she's available right now. She did message me that she had another call. But Mr. Dunnick, if you could address how is bullying addressed at Great Hearts, and what steps does the administration take to hold students accountable?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll kind of back it up to the general classroom management strategy within our campuses, and then maybe touch a little bit on the bullying aspect. So the moral formation of our students is extraordinarily important, where we're bringing students into these very consistent, rigorous, structured expectations that we have for them with respect to how they talk to one another, how they interact with us, how we elevate our speech, even in the classroom, in classroom discussions about how and why we should be good to ourselves and to one another within the community. So these very specific rules and expectations that we set in place for our students to be successful, where we'd say we're not stifling their creativity or their individuality, but this process allows them to be more full and more happy within that very consistent structure within the classroom. So maybe with more specificity to bullying, we do not allow any bullying. We have an anti-bullying process, even with anonymous communication of what is going on. And it is addressed very intentionally and addressed immediately, where if something like that is affecting the culture of our school and the moral formation of our students, we very intentionally have conversations around stopping that and correcting the behavior if possible. So we would assert relentless goodwill to our students, where we would say there is often positive motivating factors that might be resulting in negative behavior. And if we go back to that motivating factor and saying the thing that you're doing or the thing that you want or need is not a bad thing. Like, I'm validating your emotions and your motivating factors, but the thing that you're doing in order to meet that need of yours is a bad thing. So if we can address a student's humanity with that respect and validate that while saying you cannot act this way or there will be repercussions, that has allowed us to be very successful in changing the paradigm of student understanding their role in society, in even in their class, and how they should do that. So if there's more specific questions, again, I would love to talk on the phone, follow up with any of you, and if there's more specificity that I can provide on that. But let's continue.
I'm going to answer a question directly just because of time. Ms. Gibson had asked about birthday celebrations. We do allow children to bring items into school to celebrate with their friends. Most of the time they do need to be prepackaged and individually packaged. Please don't send homemade cupcakes or something like that. But yes, we will give you information when the school year starts about that. And then Arshia has been raising her hand. I'm not sure what her question is, but Arshia, you can go ahead and share with us.
Yeah, hi everyone. I have two questions actually. Where can we find this literature books for third grader? Online, or you will be providing?
So if you want to know what the books are, they're on our website, but you can get them on Amazon, you can get them on Barnes and Noble, as long as it's the same ISBN as what the document is on our website, because students take notes in them and they reference them, and teachers want to make sure that everyone's on the same page, literally.
And my second question is about the GT program. Do you have GT program or CBE program system? Like
Great question.
by exam?
We do not. We don't have a gifted and talented program. We don't have additional programs like that. We found that our canon of curricula is extraordinarily elevated and allows students who are needing support and who are gifted and talented to be met academically through our curricula through all of our grade levels. And that's another reason why we provide free tutoring and accommodations and small group instruction, because we want to elevate students to this higher academic area while making sure that anybody can come to our school. So kind of drawing them through that process. And we found that students who come out of gifted and talented programs are even challenged at Great Hearts. So it's a different way of thinking and communicating. Not that it's harder, but it's different and better and more holistic.
Is there any, you will be doing any groups like the advanced kids they will be put in some group, and the medium level groups, like medium level of kids like that?
We won't be doing that across grade level. We might do that just in the classroom, just for sake of homogeneous instruction. Like I said, with the reading groups, they might work together with someone else on their reading level. We might do that in math too, dependent on the need. Like during math instruction, they might meet with a group that needs a little bit more support, but we wouldn't put them in separate programs. We wouldn't put them in separate classes or across grade levels like that.
Like you don't even have the CBEs system? No. Okay, thank you.
Do you want to do one more?
No,
Yes.
that's it.
Mr. Dunick, Ms. Nelson had asked about flex time, and I guess I'm sorry, Ms. Nelson, do you just want to come on and ask your question?
Sure. I was just wondering, and thank you, this has been great. It's really been helpful. When you were talking about, for instance, second grade, they may do grammar all one day, or they may do grammar and split it up. Is that decided, do all the teachers decide together collectively that that's what the second grade is going to do? Or is that a teacher by teacher? I'm interested. I have twin boys who are in third grade. And so I'm just wondering how, if they'll be doing the same things regardless of which instructor they have, or if it will vary according to the instructor.
Yeah, fantastic question. So those are grade level decisions. So those are not teacher to teacher decisions. We want to provide as much consistency within the same with curriculum and instructional schedules as possible. So they might be different grade to grade. They won't be different within the same grade. So every third grade teacher will have the same academic schedule. Their specials might be different. They might, he might have art one day and he might have PE one day, but their daily instructional schedule will be the same.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I apologize. I had a lot of information to share and we're at time now. But again, seriously, if you have any questions, you've got my email. I'd love to talk to you on the phone or just correspond via email if you have any other specific questions. I really appreciate you being on here and talking to one another. I think this is going to be a great resource that we can provide to a lot of the other families who aren't able to attend midday like this. So I think this was very well served. And I look forward to Saturday, maybe meeting you some in person and continuing toward the end of the school year.
You all.